Attorney Gerald Griggs, it's really great to have you back on, and I'm glad to be able to get a chance to hear your input on all the craziness happening right now. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to get right into it. We're seeing what's happening across the country where Trump is using the National Guard, using the military to try and federalize law enforcement in cities across the country. On the West Coast, we've seen federal courts push back against his blatant efforts to use racial profiling when it comes to trying to fill these deportation quotas. On the East Coast, we've seen courts push back against his efforts to deport without due process. And in DC, we're witnessing right now, basically his efforts to try and, re, redraw the conversation towards crime as opposed to how he's handling the country and all the other scandals he's involved in. Now he's got his sights set on the Midwest, Chicago. So I wanted to first start with your reaction to everything that's happening.
Our reaction is we are not surprised. This is a person who ran on a platform the previous time on national stop and frisk. So this is exactly what he believes is appropriate under his power as president. Fortunately, the Constitution outlines the powers of the president, and one of them is not to be able to dispatch the military on United States cities. Now, District of Columbia is a little different because it's not a state. But typically, police powers are given to the governors, and of course, they're given to the states, and then the states give them to the governors. And so, if there's not a national emergency, national disaster, some type of threat to national security, the president does not have the power to use the military in American cities. So, you're seeing the pushback. You're seeing it in D.C. Where they do have a code that allows for a temporary takeover of the city, but after 30 days, it has to be approved by Congress. So hopefully they will do that soon. Watching the videos coming in from Washington, D.C., watching National Guards troops guarding national monuments that are under no threat or doing gardening duties and landscaping is not the purpose of the National Guard. And then the threats that are happening in Chicago to bring in the National Guard there, we have to be clear. Crime is down in most major metropolitan cities. So there's really no national emergency. This is an effort to distract from the issues that are happening in the country. As you just stated, federal courts have struck down a majority of the Trump tariffs, which are causing inflation to go out of just go run wild. And so you've also seen with the mass deportation efforts, again, the violation of due process that courts have stated. So I think that you'll probably see a challenge here if he tries to bring the National Guard into more cities, particularly cities that are run by black mayors or Democratic mayors, which is what his target is. And so it's unconstitutional, blatantly unconstitutional, and will not stand any type of challenge in federal court.
Hmm. The NAACP has weighed in on his efforts to, gerrymander and to expand gerrymandering so that he, can maintain control when it comes to, for instance, the midterm elections, right? In Texas, I want to say the NAACP has filed a lawsuit. Is that right?
That's correct. They filed a lawsuit against the governor of Texas who's trying to draw racially disparative maps to dampen the power of the minority vote, particularly the African Americans. And so they filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging that. They've also filed several lawsuits, redistricting lawsuits in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, all of which have been successful. And we're in the midst of a redistricting lawsuit here in Georgia. So we fully expect that once we litigate these issues, the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is still very good law. It's very strong, as we saw in Alabama. They had to carve out a new majority congressional district, and they also, federal court also held that Alabama has to redraw a state Senate seat that was last week. So I think that once you litigate this in federal court, it will be overturned. I don't think that this attempt to partisan gerrymandering will stand up to the racial gerrymandering test. And so I think Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act will declare that the maps in Texas are unconstitutional.
And for those who kind of, gerrymandering is kind of a niche issue, right? If you're not really paying attention to it. we have some Democratic governors now, of course, the governor of California, New York, and some other places being open to partisan gerrymandering, as opposed to, of course, racial gerrymandering, to try and combat what Texas, I believe Missouri, and some other states are starting to do when it comes to blatantly trying to expand Republican seats in Congress. So can you talk about, what are your thoughts on what what some Democrats are trying to do, and how does that differentiate from these lawsuits that that the NAACP has filed against Republican states?
And so, what you have to understand is the Supreme Court has declared most racial gerrymandering unconstitutional. And they've shifted the conversation to partisan gerrymandering, where they've kicked it back down to the states. There was a recent Supreme Court case that said that it was not the purview of the Supreme Court to address to address partisan gerrymandering. So you've seen a lot of states do these things right ahead of the midterms. And our position at the NAACP is anything that impinges on the rights and voting power of African Americans or minorities, we believe is unconstitutional. So I believe that you're going to see arguments that say partisan gerrymandering because of the population density in most of these areas where they lean Democratic, but they also lean heavily minority. You're seeing the crossover effect, which would be unconstitutional, violation of the Voting Rights Act. So my hope is that in these lawsuits, we will be able to make that argument and make that successful argument because really you know, gerrymandering in any form should not be happening. It should be an independent panel that draws the lines to make a determination of who will represent the state in Congress. Now, we've seen in the past on both sides of the aisle them try to maintain seats. Instead of trying to maintain seats, just put forth policy that speaks to the people, and you don't have to worry about picking your voter as opposed to the voter picking their representative. So I think that we are concerned whether it's a Democratic governor or Democratic state or Republican governor or Republican state, when we start drawing the lines and they start looking funky, usually African Americans and people of color get the raw end of the stick. So hopefully this is not a pattern. I know that the governor in California is saying this is just to address what he sees as a constitutional violation happening in Texas. But we don't need all the states doing this because it will disproportionately dilute the African American vote and the minority vote as we see the country becoming more and more multicultural.
When we talk about the stakes, right, of gerrymandering, Roland Martin recently had a representative from Louisiana on, and they kind of spoke to how, if this lawsuit in Louisiana isn't successful, when it comes to racial gerrymandering, how far it could set us back. And can you explain what they really mean by that as far as not just 1965, but like the 1880s?
So the concern is the attack that's happening in Louisiana attacks the Voting Rights Act, Section 2. We already know that the pre-clearance section of the Voting Rights Act has been declared unconstitutional because the ratio is now outdated according to the Supreme Court, and that was the Shelby County versus Holder decision. This particular case, if they declare that a Section 2 claim is not the proper remedy, then it will effectively gut the rest of the Voting Rights Act. And so the concern is if we go and gut the Voting Rights Act, we would go back to an 1890s type analysis because of the lack of teeth in any type of voting rights claim. And so my concern, as others who are constitutional scholars as well as voting rights attorneys, is if we are going to allow this to continue because there's a browning of America, it could take us back to a far gone era where Black people and people of color did not have a representative voice in electoral politics. So that's why you have lawyers and historians, like you said on Roland's show and others, who are sounding the alarm. And now I feel confident that the Voting Rights Act particularly Section 2, will be upheld because the court has already done it. This particular Supreme Court has already done it in the Alabama case and has echoed that it's still good law in several other cases recently. And so even the federal court, like I said, in that Senate district in Alabama said that as well. So I think that we're standing on solid legal footing, but you never can tell with this court, given that it's a 6-3 majority conservative court.
Mhm. You know, and when we talk about pushing back, because I feel like a lot of us are kind of just waiting to see who are gonna, who's gonna be, fighting back against all these efforts to dismantle the Constitution on paper and in practice. You know, he's still got the executive order on birthright citizenship that's being litigated, I believe, and so, you know, when we look at Chicago, and what Mayor Brandon Johnson is doing in Chicago, he recently signed an order that forbids local police from cooperating with federal ICE authorities and other authorities that are going to be coming down to the city. He's banned the use of law enforcement wearing masks, and he's urging these federal authorities who are coming to identify themselves, to wear body cameras, and to have their badge numbers visible to the public. What are your thoughts about the way the Chicago mayor has taken a stand, a pretty blatant stand against this federal administration?
I think it's appropriate. We have to remember in federalism that there's a separation of powers between the federal government and the state government and the local government. And ultimately, you have three co-equal branches fighting each other. And so, in this particular conversation, I think local mayors should retake their power because let's be clear, ICE doesn't have enough agents to fan out over anybody's city, let alone anybody's state. So they need cooperation from local and state law enforcement. And they do that through a 287G agreement. And I think given that this particular administration does not want to follow the norms and the federal law on a due process, I think more mayors should do this. Mayors need to understand, just like the President of the United States, they have executive power as well, and governors do as well. When we talk about the National Guard comes from states. And so if the governor does not empower the National Guard to be federalized, there's nothing the president can do. There's no national emergency in Chicago. As much as he wants to say that there's an epidemic on crime, there's a proper way to address that on the federal level. And I think that's what's missing in this whole conversation. The federal level, they already have the FBI. They already have the Department of Justice. They already have the Drug Enforcement Agency and so many of the alphabet soup agencies that are tasked with enforcing federal law. So I don't understand why someone would want to use the military other than those entities that are tasked with enforcing federal law are saying there's no epidemic in crime in major cities around the United States. So I think we got to have a real civics lesson on who has the power. Local mayors, local city councils have the power of policing power. State government has policing power. National government does not have the policing power to directly affect a local or state issue. Crime, for the most part, is a local or state issue unless it affects other states and then the federal government gets involved, or there's something that has expressly been declared unlawful by the federal government through the constitutional powers that it has. Because the 10th Amendment says all powers not expressly given to the federal government are reserved to the states. And so when we're having this robust conversation about what governing looks like, this is why it's important to vote in local elections, because whether or not ICE is going down your street, snatching up your neighbors and throwing them in unmarked cars with masks on is determined by your governor and your mayor. And so my hat's off to the mayor of Chicago. My hat's off to the governor in Maryland who have taken strong stances. My hat's, of course, off to the governor in California who's been using social media very interestingly recently. But other governors need to step up, and not just governors in blue states, governors in red states, because many of the actual places where crime is out of control are in red states. And so if we really want to talk about law enforcement, really want to talk about cracking down on crime, why not do it in St. Louis, Missouri? Why not, do it in other places that are having issues with crime? Crime happens in proximity. And so to focus on Chicago, which has reduced crime exponentially, and to focus on DC, which crime is down 30%, and you have National Guard troops doing gardening duties, is not cost effective. It's a waste of taxpayer funds, and it puts us in a lot more risk because what happens if God forbid, a real national emergency, a hurricane hits,
Mhm.
there's some type of domestic dispute or some type of act of terrorism. We got the National Guard doing gardening duties in D.C. So I think that we need to have real conversation with our mayors. They can sign executive orders, keeping ICE out, keeping from federalizing police through 287G, and just make sure that business as usual continues in these cities and we focus on the real issues like high inflation.
Well, and part of that is when you elect the people you want to serve you, they have to act too, right? I mean, you talk
Absolutely.
about red states. I'm in Oklahoma. We have one of the highest crime rates in the country. And in Tulsa, what we're seeing is the fear mongering that Trump might come to your city next is starting to impact other issues outside of even immigration. I'll give you an example real quick. There was a recent city council meeting where they tabled an ordinance to expand human rights protections in the workplace for people of all genders, right? They've been weighing this ordinance for months and months. And apparently, Tulsa World, a local newspaper, put out a story saying that the congressional representative for this district, basically alerted the city council that Trump was watching Tulsa and that any types of laws passed that seemed too liberal could put them in the crosshairs. And so they literally tabled a simple ordinance on just expanding human rights protections to everyone in the city because of fears that Trump might target their city next. Um, is that leadership?
No, that's not leadership. People elect their local leaders to do what's in the best interest of the local community. Whatever's happening on the federal level, that's the federal level. United States, we voted, they elected the 47th president of the United States. He has the prerogative to deal with federal issues. But human rights are not a federal issue. It's a local issue. It's a state issue. For the most part, state constitutions give you more rights than the federal constitution. So I think that elected leaders need to understand they were elected to lead. They were also sworn an oath to protect the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. If somebody has a problem with human rights and is committing human rights violations and violating the Constitution, you should not be afraid to stand up. And so, for the people that will hear this interview, I would strongly urge you to go back and read the Constitution. Read your state constitution. And then if your elected officials are not acting within the interest of that document, there's mechanisms to recall them. It's a time for profiles of courage in this generation to make sure we understand that we were born with certain inalienable rights. Our generation is the first one to have all of them. We don't want to be the last generation to have all of them because there's this fear of a dictator in the White House. Let's be clear. America has no kings. The president does not have absolute authority. We've seen that over and over again with the federal court striking down things he's done. And so in this moment, it's time for local officials to exercise their constitutionally and charter given rights against the federal government. The federal government's not doing something in the best interest of your city, not doing something in the best interest of your state. Push back. It's not being un-American. It's actually one of the most American things to do. This country was born out of a protest. Sometimes you have to protest your own government. That's why the First Amendment exists. Many people talk about Second Amendment, Second Amendment. Oh my goodness, we need. Listen, the First Amendment is the First Amendment because it's the most fundamental right you have to bring your grievances peacefully and nonviolently to your government. If you do it that way, You don't really need the Second Amendment to arm yourselves against the government. And so I think that's where we have to go. And I think that there are a lot of patriots in this country on both sides of the aisle that are pushing back and will continue to push back.
Mm. Attorney Gerald Griggs, Georgia NAACP president, thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate you.